The ship hung silent above the blue planet, invisible to every sensor the primitive species below could build. Senior Planner pressed her face closer to the viewing screen, her four eyes blinking in sequence as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. In her 200 years of studying emergency response across the galaxy, she had never seen anything quite like this. "Begin recording," she said to her junior analyst. "I want every detail saved." Below them, a massive earthquake had just torn through a human coastal city. Buildings had fallen. Roads had cracked open. Fires burned in dozens of places at once. By every model in the Galactic Emergency Response Consortium's database, this should have been the beginning of total collapse. Primitive species without faster-than-light travel typically fell into chaos during such events. They would wait for leaders to tell them what to do. They would freeze. They would fight each other for resources. The humans did none of these things. Watched a human male climb out of his damaged shelter and immediately run toward a collapsed structure next door. He had no protective equipment. He had no tools. He simply began pulling broken stones away with his bare hands, his skin tearing and bleeding as he worked. Within moments, 3 other humans joined him. They did not know each other. She could tell from their body language, from the way they spoke quick words and pointed at different sections of the rubble. They were strangers, working together as if they had trained for this moment their entire lives. "This is highly inefficient," noted. His voice carried the dry tone of someone who had spent too long studying optimization charts. "None of them have conducted a structural assessment. That building could collapse further at any moment. The logical response would be to wait for properly equipped response teams." "Keep watching," said. The humans pulled a child from the rubble. The small human was crying, covered in dust, but alive. One of the strangers picked up the child and held it close, speaking soft words that the ship's translators rendered as comfort phrases. Another stranger gave the child water from his own container. A third began checking the child for injuries, moving with the careful hands of someone who had basic medical knowledge but was not a trained professional. None of them asked for payment. None of them asked who the child belonged to. None of them stopped to calculate whether this was worth their time. "I do not understand," said. "What is their motivation?" Did not answer because she did not have an answer to give. The consortium had sent them to this planet because humans were approaching the technological threshold that would soon bring them into contact with the wider galaxy. Standard protocol required assessment missions for all emerging species. The consortium needed to understand how these beings responded to crisis so they could prepare proper integration procedures. Would humans panic when they learned they were not alone? Would they collapse under the weight of new knowledge? Would they be useful members of galactic society, or would they require careful management? Had expected to find a typical primitive species. She had expected to document their weaknesses, note their inefficiencies, and file a report recommending standard integration protocols. Instead, she found herself watching something that made her question everything she knew about emergency response. A human female in medical clothing had set up a treatment area in the open ground near the collapsed buildings. She had no proper facility. She had limited supplies. What she did have was determination that seemed to radiate from her like heat from a star. Injured humans came to her, and she treated them one after another, never stopping, never resting. When she ran out of bandages, she tore strips from her own clothing. When she ran out of clean water, a stranger appeared with more. When she needed help holding a patient still, hands appeared from the crowd to assist. "Her efficiency rating is actually quite low," said, studying his data pad. "She is making several suboptimal decisions. That patient should have been triaged differently. She is spending too much time on comfort when she should be focusing on critical injuries. And yet," said slowly, "her patients are surviving. Despite her methods, not because of them." "Are you certain?" Paused. He looked at his data, then back at the screen. The medical female was now holding the hand of an elderly human who had only minor injuries, By any reasonable assessment, she should have moved on to more serious cases. Instead, she spoke quietly with the Old One, and something in the Old One's posture changed. The fear left. The trembling stopped. The Old One nodded, stood up, and walked away to help others distribute supplies. "I do not know how to quantify that," admitted. "Neither do I." The hours passed, and watched the humans continue their strange dance of cooperation. Official response teams eventually arrived, but the citizens had already organized themselves into working groups. Some cleared debris. Some distributed food and water. Some simply stood with those who needed company. An old male with a damaged leg sat in a broken chair and directed traffic with hand signals, creating order from chaos through nothing but gestures and determination. "He has no authority," said, genuine confusion in his voice. "Why are they listening to him?" "Because someone needed to direct traffic, and he chose to do it." "But there is no hierarchy, no chain of command, no official designation." Turned to face her junior analyst. "I am beginning to think that is the point." In her long career, had studied emergency response on 47 different worlds. She had seen species with perfect hierarchies, where every citizen knew their exact role and followed orders without question. She had seen species with advanced technology that could predict and prevent most disasters before they happened. She had seen species that had evolved past the need for individual action, functioning as collective minds that responded to crisis with perfect efficiency. None of them responded like humans. The humans were messy. They made mistakes. They rushed into danger without proper assessment. They wasted resources on emotional comfort when practical concerns should have taken priority. They were, by every measure the consortium used, inefficient. And yet, a human was climbing into an unstable structure because she heard crying inside. She had no way of knowing if the structure would hold. She had no equipment to protect herself if it collapsed. She simply heard a sound of distress and moved toward it, as if her own safety was a secondary concern. "That is irrational," said. "Yes." "She could die." "Yes." "The logical choice would be to wait for proper equipment." "Yes." The human emerged from the structure carrying a small animal, not even a human child, a pet. She had risked her life for a creature that served no practical purpose. She was bleeding from a cut on her head. She was limping, and she was smiling, holding the frightened animal close to her chest and speaking soft words to calm it. "Made a decision. We need to extend this mission." Senior Planner. "This was supposed to be a standard 3-day assessment. I am extending it to 30 days, perhaps longer." "May I ask why?" Watched the human with the animal reunite with the creature's owner. The owner was crying. The rescuer was crying. They embraced like family, though they had never met before this moment. "Because I do not understand what I am seeing," said. "And if I do not understand it, I cannot report on it accurately. The consortium needs to know about this species. They need to know exactly what they are dealing with." "And what are they dealing with?" Watched a group of humans form a line to pass supplies from hand to hand, working in perfect coordination despite having no leader, no plan, and no guarantee that their efforts would succeed. "I do not know yet," she said, "but I intend to find out." She ordered the ship to settle into a stable orbit. There would be no quick assessment here, no simple report. The humans had already shown her that every model she trusted was incomplete. Now she needed to learn why. The observation mission had only just begun. 30 days became 60, 60 became 90, stopped counting somewhere around the 4th month, too absorbed in her research to care about schedules. The consortium sent messages asking for updates. She sent back requests for more time. They demanded preliminary findings. She sent back data that made no sense without context. Eventually, they stopped asking and simply waited. Had filled 17 data storage units with observations. He had documented 847 separate crisis events across the human planet, ranging from small accidents to massive natural disasters. He had analyzed response patterns, measured efficiency ratings, and calculated survival probability matrices. None of it added up to anything coherent. "I have found an error in our models," he announced one morning, his voice flat with exhaustion. Looked up from her own research, just one. One fundamental error that affects all other calculations. He projected his findings onto the main screen. "We have been measuring human crisis response as if it were a system, as if there were rules they follow, hierarchies they obey, protocols they implement. There are systems. We have documented their emergency services, their government response agencies, their medical facilities. Yes, but those systems are not how humans actually respond to crisis." Pulled up footage from a flood event they had observed 3 weeks earlier. "Watch carefully." The footage showed a river that had exceeded its banks, swallowing a small human settlement. Official response teams were present, but they were overwhelmed. Too much water, too many people in danger, too few resources. And then something happened that had flagged for special analysis. A group of humans arrived in small personal watercraft. They were not emergency responders. They were ordinary citizens from a settlement 200 kilometers away. They had seen news reports of the flooding, loaded their boats onto transport vehicles, and driven through the night to help strangers they had never met. They had no obligation to come, said. No payment was offered. No authority ordered them to respond. They simply saw a problem and decided to become part of the solution. "We have documented similar behavior before." Yes, but watch what happens next. The citizen responders began pulling people from flooded structures. One of them, a large male with a damaged watercraft, spotted an elderly female trapped on an upper level of a building. The water was rising. The official responders had marked that building as too dangerous to approach. The structures around it were collapsing. The male went anyway. "This is where our models fail completely," said. "Every calculation says he should not have survived. The probability of success was less than 12%. The probability of his own death was over 60%. No rational being would accept those odds for a stranger." "What happened?" "He saved her. He also saved 2 others who were trapped in adjacent structures. His watercraft was destroyed in the process. He nearly drowned twice. When he finally reached safe ground, other humans surrounded him, calling him a hero." Studied the footage and his response. "He said he was just doing what anyone would do. Then he asked if there was anyone else who needed help." The room fell silent, closed the footage and turned to face his senior. "I have analyzed 847 crisis events," he said. "In 94.7% of them, I found at least one human who made choices that rational self-interest. They ran toward danger when running away would have ensured their survival. They gave away resources when keeping them would have improved their own position. They stayed to help when leaving would have been easier." "What is driving them?" "I do not know. I have considered every possibility: cultural conditioning, religious obligation, social pressure. None of them explain the consistency of the behavior. A human in one region responds almost identically to a human on the opposite side of the planet, despite having completely different cultures, beliefs, and social structures." Had been wrestling with the same question for months. She had formed a theory, but it was so unusual that she had hesitated to share it. "I believe," she said slowly, "that they simply cannot do otherwise." "Cannot." "It is not a choice for them, not in the way we understand choice. When they see another being in distress, something activates in them that overrides other concerns. They have to respond. The alternative is not merely undesirable, it is psychologically impossible." Considered this. That would explain the consistency. It would also explain why their systems are designed the way they are. Their official emergency services exist not to replace individual response but to support it. They assume their citizens will help each other. They build infrastructure around that assumption. That is a dangerous assumption. What happens when citizens do not help? Other citizens fill the gap. Pulled up her own research. She had been studying what humans called disasters within disasters, events where official systems completely failed, power outages, communication blackouts, government collapse. According to consortium models, these should have resulted in total social breakdown. Instead, she found neighborhoods that organized themselves into mutual aid networks. She found strangers forming protective groups to ensure vulnerable people received care. She found humans walking dozens of kilometers to deliver supplies to people they had never met. They do not optimize for efficiency, she said. They optimize for refusal to surrender. When a system fails, they become the system. When infrastructure collapses, their social bonds become infrastructure. But they make mistakes. We have documented hundreds of poor decisions, wasted resources, failed rescues. Yes, and then other humans compensate for those mistakes. They treat failure not as the end of a process, but as information to be incorporated into ongoing efforts. They do not stop when they fail. They adjust and continue. Was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its usual dry efficiency. Senior Planner, I believe I understand now why you extended this mission. Why do you think? Because if we report our findings accurately, the consortium will not believe us. We need overwhelming evidence. We need documentation so complete that there can be no doubt. Nodded slowly. That is part of it, but there is another reason. She turned back to the viewing screen, where the blue planet turned peacefully in the void. I want to understand them well enough to recommend that we change our own protocols. The consortium has used the same emergency response models for 6,000 years. We optimize for resources. We calculate acceptable losses. We design systems that function when everything goes according to plan. And humans. Humans design for when everything goes wrong. They expect failure. They plan for chaos. They build redundancy not through careful engineering, but through the simple fact that each of them is willing to become whatever is needed in the moment. She pulled up footage of a recent earthquake response. In it, a human teacher had transformed her educational facility into a shelter. A human shopkeeper had opened his stores and given away supplies for free. A human driver had used her vehicle as an ambulance for 18 hours straight. None of them had training for what they did, said. None of them were assigned these roles. They simply saw what was needed and became it. That level of adaptability should be impossible without centralized coordination. And yet, looked at his data, then back at the planet below. What do we do with this information? We learn from it, and then we teach others. The observation continued. There was still so much to understand. The chamber of the Galactic Emergency Response Consortium was vast enough to hold representatives from 37 species. Ancient stone pillars rose toward a ceiling lost in shadow. Light filtered through crystal panels, casting patterns on the floor that shifted with the movement of the world outside. This was where emergency response policy had been decided for 6,000 years. This was where now stood, preparing to challenge everything they believed. Her report had caused difficulties even before she arrived. The preliminary data she had sent ahead had been flagged as corrupted by 3 separate analysis teams. When they confirmed the data was accurate, the analysis teams had requested additional verification. When verification was provided, they had asked for psychological evaluation of the researchers. Surely, and had been affected by some local phenomenon. Surely they had made errors. But had spent 2 full years on her research. She had observed 2,847 separate crisis events. She had interviewed human emergency responders, translated their training materials, and studied their historical records. She had walked among them in disguise, speaking with ordinary citizens about their expectations during disaster. Her report was 4,000 pages long, filled with footage, data, and analysis. She was ready. "Honored Council," she began, her voice carrying through the chamber, "I come before you to present findings that will challenge our fundamental assumptions about emergency response. I ask only that you observe the evidence before forming conclusions." The council leader, an ancient being whose species had been founding members of the consortium, inclined their head. "We have reviewed your preliminary data, senior planner. We have questions." "I welcome them. Your data suggests that humans respond to crisis without central coordination, that they make decisions independently, often in conflict with official directives, that they prioritize emotional factors over practical efficiency, and yet you claim their survival rates exceed what our models predict." "That is correct. How is this possible?" Activated her display. The chamber filled with footage from her 2 years of observation. Earthquakes, floods, fires, storms. Humans running toward danger instead of away from it. Strangers helping strangers. Resources flowing without official direction. Order emerging from chaos through nothing but collective will. "Our models assume that efficiency equals effectiveness," she said. "We calculate the optimal distribution of resources, the ideal response times, the proper chain of command. We design systems that function perfectly when followed correctly." She paused, letting the footage continue to play. "Humans do not follow these models. They cannot follow them because they were never designed to function as components in a larger system. Each human is, in some fundamental way, a complete crisis response unit. When disaster strikes, they do not wait for instructions. They assess the situation with whatever information they have and take whatever action seems appropriate." A council member interrupted. "That sounds like chaos. How can any coordinated response emerge from individuals acting independently?" "That was my question as well. The answer took me 2 years to understand, and I'm still not certain I fully grasp it." Pulled up her core analysis. "Humans have an unusual capacity that I have termed adaptive empathy. When they witness another being in distress, they experience a psychological response that motivates immediate action. This response is not calculated. It is not chosen. It simply happens as automatically as breathing. All social species have some form of empathic response." "Yes, but in most species empathy is bounded. It applies to family, to community, to species. Humans appear to have developed unbounded empathy. They respond to distress in strangers, in other species, even in artificial representations of beings that do not exist. Their empathic response does not distinguish between those who deserve help and those who do not. It simply activates." The footage showed a human risking injury to rescue an animal from a dangerous situation. Another human giving food to a stranger while hungry themselves. A group of humans crossing a burning landscape to reach a settlement of people they had never met. This creates what I call distributed redundancy. When formal systems fail, informal systems activate. When infrastructure collapses, social bonds become infrastructure. Every human is a potential emergency responder, not through training but through fundamental psychological architecture. The council leader leaned forward. "You are suggesting that their seemingly chaotic response is actually a form of organization we do not recognize." "I am suggesting that it is more effective than our form of organization, despite appearing less efficient." Murmurs spread through the chamber, pressed on. "Our protocols are designed to maximize efficiency. We calculate acceptable losses. We optimize for the best average outcome. But this approach has a weakness that I never recognized until I studied humans. We optimize for the median case. We design for when most things go right." She pulled up comparative data between consortium response protocols and human crisis outcomes. Humans optimize for the worst case. They assume everything will go wrong. They expect failure, communication breakdown, resource shortages, and command structure collapse. Because they expect these things, they prepare for them at the individual level. When the worst case occurs, they do not freeze. They do not wait for instructions. They simply become whatever is needed. That level of individual responsibility must create inconsistency, a council member objected. Some individuals will respond well, others will respond poorly. You are correct. Individual human responses vary enormously. Some panic, some freeze, some make poor decisions that cost lives, but here is what our models fail to capture. Other humans compensate for these failures. When one individual makes a mistake, another corrects it. When one resource stream fails, another opens. They treat each other as adaptive systems rather than fixed components. She showed footage of a human making a poor triage decision, followed by another human quietly correcting the error without confrontation. A supply distribution that began inefficiently, then spontaneously reorganized as humans recognized the problem and adjusted. They are not efficient, said. They are resilient. And resilience, I have come to believe, is more valuable than efficiency when facing crisis. The council deliberated among themselves. Finally, the council leader spoke. Even if we accept your analysis, what would you have us do? We cannot remake our species to match human psychological architecture. No, but we can learn from their approach. Pulled up her final recommendation. I am formally proposing 3 changes to consortium emergency response protocols. The chamber fell silent. First, I recommend the abolition of acceptable loss calculations. The concept of acceptable losses creates psychological permission to stop trying. Humans do not accept losses. They find the concept personally offensive. This attitude, irrational as it may seem, drives them to achieve outcomes our models would classify as impossible. Second, I recommend redesigning our response protocols to assume system failure rather than system success. Our current approach requires proper functioning of command structures, communication systems, and resource distribution networks. When these fail, our responders wait for repair or instruction. Humans are trained to continue operating independently when systems fail. We should adopt similar training. Third, I recommend integrating what I call the H factor into all future response planning. This is my term for the irrational persistence that humans demonstrate in crisis. We cannot quantify it precisely. We cannot predict when it will manifest. But we must account for its existence because it consistently produces outcomes that our models cannot explain. The council leader studied her for a long moment. You are asking us to abandon 6,000 years of optimization in favor of an approach that you admit you cannot fully explain. I am asking you to recognize that 6,000 years of optimization may have led us to a local maximum rather than a global one. We have become very good at what we do, but humans have shown me that there are other approaches we have never considered. She pulled up one final piece of footage. It showed a human disaster zone 3 months after the initial event. The buildings had been rebuilt. The community had recovered. Survivors were helping new arrivals who had come to start fresh lives in the rebuilt area. Their survival rates consistently exceed what their technology should allow. Their communities recover faster than our models predict. They experience disasters that should destroy them and emerge stronger than before. I do not fully understand how they do this, but I know that we would be foolish not to learn from them. The council deliberated for 2 days, waited, reviewing her research, preparing for rejection. The consortium had not changed its fundamental protocols in 3,000 years. She was asking them to reconsider everything. On the 3rd day, the council leader summoned her back to the chamber. We have studied your report in detail. We have debated its implications. We have consulted with response coordinators across the consortium. Braced herself. Your first recommendation is rejected. Acceptable loss calculations are too embedded in our resource allocation systems to remove without complete restructuring. Her heart sank. However, we are creating a new category in our calculations. We are calling it aspirational zero, representing the goal of zero losses rather than calculated acceptable losses. This will not change immediate protocols, but it will shift long-term planning toward the approach you recommend. The council leader continued. Your second recommendation is accepted in modified form. We will pilot independent response training in 7 systems, with full evaluation after 10 years. If the results match your predictions, we will consider broader implementation. That was more than she had hoped. Your third recommendation presented unique challenges. We cannot quantify the H factor. We cannot predict it. We cannot train for it, but we can acknowledge it. The council leader's voice carried something that might have been admiration. We are adding a new section to all response planning documents. It will note that human crisis response consistently exceeds modeled predictions due to factors that cannot be. It will recommend that planners account for similar potential in other species, including our own. Stood very still. You are acknowledging that our models are incomplete. We are acknowledging that your research has shown us something we did not know. That is the purpose of research. The council leader inclined their head. Senior planner, you came before this council expecting rejection. You prepared arguments for the value of understanding over efficiency, for adaptation over optimization. You did not need them. We are scientists. When the evidence demands a new conclusion, we accept it. And the humans? First contact protocols are being revised to account for their unique characteristics. When the time comes, they will be welcomed as full members of the consortium. Their perspective on crisis response will be valuable. Thought of all the humans she had observed, the ones who ran into burning buildings, the ones who stayed awake for days to help strangers, the ones who refused to accept that anyone was beyond saving. They will change us, she said quietly. Perhaps that is what we need. The council session ended. Returned to her quarters, where was waiting with news from the planet they had studied for so long. There has been another earthquake, he said. Large one, major population center. Felt a familiar weight settle over her. How many would die this time? How many would suffer? Pulled up the footage. Humans were already responding. Strangers pulling strangers from rubble. Neighbors sharing resources. Medical professionals working beyond exhaustion. Ordinary people becoming extraordinary because the moment demanded it. They never stop, said, something like wonder in his voice. No, agreed, they never do. She watched them work, these strange, irrational, beautiful beings who refused to accept that anything was impossible. The consortium would learn from them. The galaxy would be better for their presence. And somewhere on that blue planet, a human was climbing into the darkness to reach someone who needed help, never doubting for a moment that the effort was worth making. That was the H factor. That was what the consortium could never quite capture in their equations. Humans simply refused to give up.